46 kilometers south of the Kremlin, a little after 2 in the morning on July 20th, a storage tank at the Podolsk oil depot stops being a tank and becomes a column of fire climbing into the dark. NASA satellites log the heat signature before Moscow's emergency services log the first call. The drones that did this did not launch from the front line. They launched more than 400 kilometers away. How something the size of a light aircraft crossed the most heavily defended airspace in Russia, we'll get to that. First, the tank. Podolsk is not a battlefield. It is a commuter town in the southern sprawl of the Moscow region, a place of apartment blocks and warehouses and light industry, the kind of gray Russian suburb where nothing is supposed to happen. The oil depot there is small by the standards of the industry. Open-source imagery puts it at roughly 10 storage tanks, a combined capacity somewhere near 19,400 cubic meters. It is not a strategic refinery. It is a distribution node. Fuel comes in. Fuel goes out, trucks queue at the loading racks in the morning. On any normal night, it is one of the least interesting objects within 100 kilometers of the Russian capital. On the night of July 19th into the 20th, it became one of the most photographed places in Russia. This was not a one-off. It was the loudest single note in a campaign that has been building all summer, a sustained Ukrainian effort to reach past the front line, past the border regions, and into the industrial and logistical heart of the country that invaded it. In the 2 weeks before Podolsk, Ukrainian deep strike drones had already reached oil depots in the Tver region and down in Stavropol, more than 500 kilometers out. They had reached refinery infrastructure near Ufa, over 1,400 kilometers from Ukrainian soil, deep into the Ural foothills. Podolsk was not the deepest strike of the month. It was simply the one that landed closest to Vladimir Putin's front door. Let's be precise about what is confirmed and what is claimed, because on a night like this, the two get tangled fast. Confirmed, President Zelensky himself stated that Ukrainian forces struck an oil depot and logistics facilities in the Moscow region, and framed the operation as reaching more than 400 kilometers beyond Ukraine's border. Confirmed. The fire at the depot was independently corroborated by NASA satellite thermal anomaly system, the same orbital sensors that track wildfires worldwide. When those sensors flag a heat bloom at a fixed industrial site in the middle of the night, that is not social media rumor. That is a physical fire seen from space. Confirmed, Ukraine also struck 6 vessels in the Black Sea that same window, 2 tankers and 4 dry cargo ships. Claimed and attributed to the other side, Moscow's mayor, Sergei Sobyanin, stated that more than 400 drones approached the capital region that night and that 85 of them were shot down. That figure comes from a Russian official. It has not been verified by Kyiv, and it should be read the way you read any number released by the side that just got hit. As a claim with a purpose, not as a measurement. 400 drones is a number that says 2 things at once. Our enemy attacked us with overwhelming force, and our air defenses performed magnificently. Both messages are convenient. Neither is independently checkable, so we hold it at arm's length. What is not in dispute is the geography, and the geography is the whole story. More than 400 kilometers. Hold that number because everything about how this strike was possible lives inside it. The quadcopter FPV drones that define the frontline war, the ones you have seen chase a soldier down a tree line, the ones that drop grenades into open tank hatches. Those are battery-powered, first-person view machines with an effective reach of maybe 15 to 60 kilometers on a good day. They are exquisite hunters at short range and completely irrelevant at 400. A quadcopter cannot fly from Ukraine to Moscow any more than a bicycle can cross an ocean. Whatever reached Podolsk was a different animal entirely. That different animal is a long-range, one-way attack drone. Fixed wing, internal combustion engine, not a battery. A body in the class of 250 to 300 kilograms, carrying a warhead in the 50 to 75 kilogram range, with demonstrated flight ranges past 1,000 kilometers. Ukraine's signature platform in exactly this role is the N-196, the drone commonly called Lyuty, the machine that has driven the bulk of Ukraine's deep strikes on Russian refineries and fuel depots through 2025 and into 2026. It looks less like a hobby drone and more like a small crop duster with no cockpit and no intention of ever landing. Here is the honest caveat, and this channel gives it to you straight. No source has explicitly named the Lyuty for the Podolsk strike specifically. What we can say is that the platform fits the mission the way a key fits a lock. The range is right, the role is right, the target set is right, and Lyuty-class drones have been doing precisely this job all year. So treat it as the most likely tool, category consistent, unconfirmed for this exact event. That distinction matters. So we are not going to tell you we know the tail number when we don't. We are going to tell you what class of weapon can physically do what was done, and let the honesty stand on its own. Now to the harder question, not what flew but how it got there. The airspace over the Moscow region is on paper the densest air defense environment on the planet. This is the political center of a nuclear state, ringed by layers of defense that have been built and rebuilt since the Cold War. Long-range S-400 batteries, medium-range systems, point defense guns, and short-range missiles clustered around specific high-value sites. The Kremlin sits under an umbrella designed to stop strategic bombers and ballistic missiles. And on the night of July 19th, that umbrella had to contend with something it was never optimized to catch: a swarm of small, slow, low-flying propeller aircraft coming in from multiple directions at once. That mismatch is the core of the entire deep strike doctrine, and it is worth sitting with. Air defense is an economics problem before it is a physics problem. An interceptor missile from a high-end system can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases well over $1 million. A long-range attack drone costs a small fraction of that. Build costs for platforms in this class run in the low tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes less. When you fire a $1 million missile at a $50,000 drone, you win the engagement and lose the war of arithmetic. Send enough drones and the defender faces an ugly choice. Expend premium interceptors at a ruinous exchange rate, or let some of the swarm through. There is no third option. Physics and budgets don't negotiate. And here is the mid-mission truth, the one that survived contact with the target. Even if Sobyanin's 85 interceptions were entirely real, that leaves the overwhelming majority of the reported wave unaccounted for. 85 out of a claimed 400 is not a shield, it is a sieve. The tank at Podolsk did not care how many of its companions were shot down over the outer suburbs. It only cared that at least one drone finished the route. On this night, at least one did. Several more found other addresses. We'll come back to those. Let's go back in time to the days before the fire and look at what the strike actually had to solve. A deep strike is not a single event. It is the tail end of a long chain, and every link in that chain has to hold. Somewhere well behind Ukrainian lines, in a launch area kept deliberately vague in every public account, a crew prepares a batch of these fixed-wing drones. Each one is programmed with a route, not a straight line, because a straight line is a death sentence over defended terrain, but a winding path that threads between known air defense positions, hugs terrain where it can, and approaches the target from an angle the defenders are least likely to be watching. The route is the weapon as much as the warhead is. Think about what that route has to account for: the location of major radar sites, the reach of each missile battery it will pass, the likely reaction time of the crews manning them. The drone flies for hours, often through the night, at speeds that would embarrass a fighter jet, a couple hundred kilometers an hour at most. It is slow, but slow, low, and small is a genuinely hard target for systems built to kill things that are fast, high, and large. The Moscow Air Defense Complex spent decades learning to catch the wrong kind of threat. The drones are the right kind of wrong. Now picture the target end of the chain the same night from the Russian side. The lieutenant colonel responsible for a fuel distribution node in a Moscow suburb is not, on the evening of July 19th, a man expecting to be at the center of the war. His depot is a logistics afterthought, 400 kilometers from anything he thinks of as the front. His mental map has the war happening somewhere else to someone else. That comfortable distance, that is the exact vulnerability Ukraine's deep strike campaign is built to attack, not the tanks themselves. The assumption that the tanks are safe. For most of the summer, Russian officials had leaned hard on the idea that the capital region was protected. Air defense drills, reassuring statements, the visible presence of hardware around the city. And for the population of Moscow, that reassurance had mostly held. The war was a television event, a thing that happened to soldiers and to border towns, not to the loading racks of a suburban fuel depot. The genius of a strike like Podolsk is not primarily the diesel it destroys. It is the reassurance it destroys. You cannot promise a city its skies are sealed and then have a tank farm burning within sight of the commuter rail. There's a detail here worth holding onto, and we'll return to it at the end. The Podolsk depot is small, 10 tanks, 19,000 cubic meters. In pure tonnage of destroyed fuel, this is not the biggest strike of the summer, not even close. Remember that because it tells you what this operation was actually for. Keep it in the back of your mind. Around 5 minutes into a night like this, the picture snaps into focus. The launch crews have done their part hours earlier. The routes are flying themselves now, drone after drone grinding through the dark toward a capital region that is beginning, too late, to understand what is inbound. The first air raid warnings ripple outward. Somewhere in the Moscow air defense network, operators start tracking contacts, dozens of them from more than one bearing. And the small depot in Podolsk, along with a scatter of logistics sites across the region, sits at the end of routes that were plotted days before, waiting for the machines to arrive. They are arriving, that is the setup, now the night itself. The reported wave does not come as a single mass. Deep strikes rarely do. They come in a stream spread across bearings and minutes precisely to overload the defense and force it to split its attention. From the Russian accounts that night, contacts appear over multiple approaches to the capital region. Air defense crews engage. Tracer and missile launches are reported over the outer suburbs. Some of the inbound drones come down, Sobyanin's 85, real or inflated, represent whatever fraction the defenses manage to reach. But the geometry of the swarm means that intercepting 85 contacts still leaves the sky full of the ones you didn't reach. At the Podolsk depot, the ground crew and the local response are working from the assumption their site is not the target. 400 kilometers of Russian territory sit between them and the enemy. That assumption dies at altitude, as a fixed-wing drone that has been flying for hours completes the final leg of a route it never deviated from. There is no dogfight at the end of a deep strike. There is no dramatic duel. There is a small propeller aircraft arriving on schedule, descending onto a tank farm that has no meaningful defense of its own. The impact is not subtle. A warhead in the 50 to 75 kilogram class, striking a storage tank holding thousands of cubic meters of fuel, does not produce a neat hole. It produces ignition. The tank's contents flash over. The fire climbs. And within moments, the thermal signature is bright enough and hot enough that an orbiting NASA sensor, designed to spot forest fires from hundreds of kilometers up, flags a heat anomaly at the exact coordinates of a suburban Russian fuel depot. That is the moment the strike stops being a Ukrainian claim and becomes a physical fact recorded by a neutral American satellite. The fire is real. The map has been redrawn in orange. The tank burns. And Podolsk is not the only address on the list. Across the Moscow region that same night, other routes are terminating on other targets. Local reporting and geolocated footage place a major warehouse fire in the Domodovo area at Kalyadino, a large logistics and retail distribution facility, the kind of sprawling warehouse complex that keeps a city of 13 million supplied. Another fire is reported at a logistics park near Belai Stalby, further south. These are not glamorous military targets. They are the connective tissue of Russian logistics, the warehouses and distribution nodes that move fuel and goods, and ultimately the material of the war effort. Ukraine is not just hitting the front. It is reaching into the supply chain that feeds the front from 1,000 kilometers behind it. And while the Moscow region burned, a second, entirely separate operation was unfolding on the water. That same window, Ukrainian forces struck 6 vessels in the Black Sea, 2 tankers, and 4 dry cargo ships, confirmed in Zelensky's own account. This ties into a parallel campaign that has been running since the start of July, a sustained effort against the so-called Shadow Fleet. The aging, opaquely owned tankers Russia uses to move sanctioned oil around the world and keep the revenue flowing despite Western price caps. That maritime campaign has struck at well over 180 vessels linked to that fleet since the 1st of July. 6 ships in one night is this episode's haul. It is not the total. The total keeps climbing week after week, hull after hull. Put the two halves of the night together and the strategy comes into focus. On land, Ukraine is burning the fuel. At sea, Ukraine is going after the ships that carry the oil that funds the fuel. It is the same target attacked from two ends, the physical logistics of the war on one side, the financial logistics of the war on the other. A depot fire and a tanker strike look like separate stories. They are the same story told in two languages. 15 minutes into a night like this, the accounting begins, and the accounting is where the real meaning lies. What actually burned at Podolsk in tonnage was modest. 10 tanks, roughly 19,000 cubic meters of capacity, a fraction of what Ukraine has torched at larger sites in the Tver region in Stavropol near Ufa. If you measured this strike purely in destroyed diesel, you would file it as a minor entry in a busy month. But that measurement misses the entire point. This target was never chosen for its volume. It was chosen for its coordinates. 46 kilometers from the Kremlin. That is the number that turns a small suburban depot into a strategic event. Because the message of the strike is not "I destroyed 19,000 cubic meters of fuel." The message is "I can reach 46 kilometers from your seat of government, and your 400-kilometer buffer, your S-400 rings, your reassurances to your own capital, none of it stopped me. The fuel is the pretext. The reach is the payload. Consider what that reach does to the Russian defensive problem. Air defense is finite. Every battery pulled back to thicken the umbrella over Moscow is a battery not defending a frontline airfield, a supply hub, a command post near the actual fighting. By forcing Russia to worry about its own capital region, Ukraine imposes a tax that is paid in redeployed hardware and reallocated attention. A drone that costs tens of thousands of dollars, by simply arriving over the right suburb, can pull million-dollar interceptor systems away from the front. That is the exchange rate that keeps the deep strike campaign alive. It is arithmetic, and the arithmetic favors the attacker. The intercepted reassurance is the deeper wound. For a year, Russian authorities cultivated the idea that the war lived somewhere far away, at the edges, in the border regions and the occupied territories. Podolsk is a commuter town. Domodedovo is where Moscow's air travelers pass through. Belai Stalby is a name on the suburban rail line. When those places show up in the same sentence as fire and drone, the psychological geography of the war changes for millions of people who had been told repeatedly that they were safe. You cannot unburn a tank farm that half the region can see from its windows. And the campaign context is what makes this durable rather than a one-night headline. Podolsk did not happen in isolation. It is one increment in a machine that has been reaching deeper and hitting more often all year. Tver, Stavropol, Ufa, and now a Moscow suburb, with the Black Sea tanker campaign running alongside it on the water. The trend is the story. Each strike alone is a fuel depot or a warehouse or a ship. Together they are a systematic effort to make Russian depth stop meaning Russian safety. The line where a Russian logistics officer can assume his site is beyond reach has been moving steadily inward for months. On the night of July 19th, it moved to within sight of the capital. Let's close the loops we opened. How did something the size of a light aircraft cross the most heavily defended airspace in Russia? Not by being fast or stealthy, but by being cheap, patient, and numerous. A fixed-wing, engine-driven, one-way drone flying a route plotted to slip between the seams of a defense built for a different threat, arriving as one of many so that stopping most still means missing enough. The exchange rate did the rest. Interceptors are expensive and finite. Drones are cheap and many. That is not a loophole in Russia's defense. That is the shape of the war now. And what class of weapon did it? Most likely a Lyuty-class long-range attack drone, the platform that fits this mission the way it fits every deep strike Ukraine has run this year, though no source has confirmed the specific machine for this specific target, and this channel is not going to invent one for you. The range is right. The roll is right. The result is a fire that a NASA satellite logged from orbit above a suburb 46 kilometers from the Kremlin. Remember that the depot was small. 10 tanks. That was never the weakness in the target. It was the point of it. Russia can rebuild 10 tanks of storage in a matter of weeks. What it cannot rebuild as easily is the belief, sold to its own capital, that 400 kilometers of territory is the same thing as a wall. That belief burned faster than the diesel did, and it will take longer to replace. The corridor around Moscow used to be the part of Russia where the war was an abstraction. It is not an abstraction anymore. The line of which kilometer is safe has moved again inward, toward the center, closer to the men who ordered the invasion than to the men sent to fight it. The defenders moved that line, and they will move it again on the next dark night from more than 400 kilometers away.